I've recently started to grow tired of using the satellite receiver built into my TV. It works okay for a bit of fun and as a sort of little bonus feature, but for serious use, it's a bit limited. It's only got one tuner, so you can't record two things at the same time or watch one thing while recording another. And the EPG only gives you now and next. You can't really go into the future, which makes it completely useless if you want to record things down the line. I looked into different options to replace it, so of course the first option being in the UK I looked at was FreeSat, so I looked at the FreeSat boxes. However, to get one to record was pretty expensive. The cheapest recorder is about 170 odd quid, which is quite a lot for what you're getting. Of course that would be absolutely fine, and for most people that would be the best option, but I thought for me it would be quite fun to get something a bit different and a bit more powerful, so I went for this. The receiver I ended up going for is the Mutant HD51. This is part of a large range of receivers that run embedded Linux rather than proprietary firmware. This is really useful as it means you can run all different sorts of distributions of the firmware, and you can expand it with lots of different plugins to suit your needs. When looking at these receivers, you'll often hear about Enigma2. Enigma2 is a sort of name that covers a wide range of these firmware images that there's all different distributions of. So you can download a distribution that suits your needs, all based on Enigma2. There's some that have more features that require quite a powerful box to run, then there's other ones that are really lightweight that can run on cheap low-end boxes. But the benefit is you can install all the plugins you would need, so you can install plugins for program guides, you can install plugins to download EPG data from different satellite streams, you can download plugins that can pull data from the internet, and you can do that all straight on the box. You can also do really cool features such as streaming video over the network to devices around your house. You can use it to write recording data to network shares instead of a built-in hard drive. There's huge amounts of scope for expanding these things, so that's why I went for it. This machine I bought cost about £160, and I bought it from a place in the UK called World of Satellite. It costs around the same as the FreeSat box, however this just is so much more expandable, and even though it's not going to be a nice case of taking it out of the box, plugging it in and having it work straight away, for me as someone who likes tinkering with things and playing with fancy technology, this is definitely caters to me a lot more than a boring FreeSat box. So what we'll do is we'll take a look around the box, take it out, take a look at the hardware, I'll then get it fired up and we'll take a look at the initial setup, and then we'll try some different firmware on it. When I bought this, I was given the option from World of Satellite to pick a firmware image I wanted flashed to it. It's very easy to flash it yourself, so I actually didn't do that. I just requested it with the factory firmware, mainly because I'm interested to see what this comes with from the factory, and see what the factory firmware is like compared to the more advanced images you can install on these. This device also is 4K capable. I wasn't overly fussed about 4K. I do have a 4K TV, however there's not many free-to-air satellite channels in 4K. In fact, the only ones I've found so far are demo ones. However, it's nice to have it for being future-proof. I will, however, be interested to see whether this is actually 4K, can it receive 4K satellite channels, or is it that sort of scammy 4K where it can play 4K content back off a disc, but it can't actually receive 4K channels. So I'll be really interested to see that when we get it fired up. So what we'll do now is we'll take it out of the box and take a look at it. So on the front of the box, we can see we have a picture of the receiver as well as the Mutant Digital Technology branding. There's various brands you'll see of these receivers, but they're still fairly generic devices that are made in bulk and then branded by different companies with slight customizations. However, this one's branded Mutant HD51. You can see some sort of logos down here that are all fairly generic looking. IPTV ready apparently, Ultra HD because it's 4K. H.265 video codec, that'll be for playing back recorded video, because you can also use these as media players to play back your own recordings from various sources. Runs Linux, has time shift, it's got a card reader so you can use smart cards if you have a provider that provides that. For me, I'm just only using this for free-to-air satellite, so I won't be using that. HDMI, duh. E2 operating system, that's Enigma2. USB Wi-Fi support, so it's not got built-in Wi-Fi, but because they're Linux you can use USB Wi-Fi adapters. MKV format, cool. And they felt it was really important to tell us that it supports NTP internet time, which is sort of fairly implied by it being Linux, but if they feel need to advertise all the features. But now let's get inside and see the more interesting stuff. So the first thing we see is a sort of warning from the retailer saying not to remove the protective plastics before you're happy with it. I suppose that makes sense. In the UK, and actually I think in the EU, the distance selling regulations mean you have to be able to open something, inspect it, try it out, and then return it to online retailers. So they obviously just don't want people taking them out of the box, peeling all the plastics off, deciding they don't like the receiver and sending it back sort of without the plastic. So that's quite fair. And to be fair, it's good they put that in, because the first thing I would do is take the plastic off, so it makes sense to warn me not to do that. Next thing you get is a fairly thick instruction manual, and it is all in English, so it's pretty comprehensive looking. And now we get the receiver itself, so take that out. That's the main receiver. We'll take a look at that in a minute. So let's take a look at the accessories we get first. So the first thing we find is an HDMI cable. Don't really need it, but always nice to include. And then the remote, which we'll take out and see what it's like. So that's the remote. It feels fairly nice in hand. It's quite small. And actually the button, it definitely feels quite cheap. It feels quite light and plasticky. But they're pretty tactile buttons. They sort of click quite solidly, which is nice. You're not going to have that thing where the remote's really mushy and you're never sure if your command actually registered. So the remote definitely feels quite cheap, but it's not a top quality device. But yeah, that's the remote. Next thing you get is this cable for connecting the hard drive. So what you've got is power there and SATA there, and then that can plug onto the back of your hard drive. Now, one concern with this, and I'm being overly paranoid with this, but this is that type of SATA connector where it's moulded, as in they insert the wires into the mould and then they mould the plastic around the wires. That's in comparison to the slightly nicer SATA connectors where they make a plastic shell, put metal terminals on the end of the wires and then clip them in. These have been known in the sort of PC building world to have just manufacturing problems where over time they can sort of start shorting out and overheat and melt and go all smoky and catch fire and stuff like that. Now, it's a really rare issue. It's not like there's millions of these types of SATA connectors in the world, so it's not a huge problem, but it's just something that I've seen a lot of bad experiences of. So I'm not really a fan of this style of SATA connector where they mold the plastic around the wires. This one will probably be okay, but it's just I'm just going to be a bit wary of it. What I think I'll do is I'll use it for now because I've got it here. But then I'll try and source one of these connectors on the end and then make my own cable up with a better SATA power connector. I am really probably over-exaggerating this massively. It's just something that I've found in the PC building world that this style of SATA connector can be a bit dodgy. So it's a slight shame to see that. But as I said, it's very unlikely to cause a problem, but it's just something that I'm personally not a big fan of. But with that slightly weird diversion there, we've got a box of accessories to take a look at. So let's see what we have here. So in here we have a pair of batteries for the remote, just standard AAAs, branded large, interesting. Next we have a little bag of screws. These will be for mounting the hard drive. So you get some screws, some washers, and a single zip tie for some reason. That'll be for mounting the hard drive, which we'll do later. Next up we have the power adapter. So here's the power brick, which is made by a brand called GSP. I've never heard of them, and it's all in Chinese, so I've got no idea really what quality this is. But it's 12 volts, 3 amps, and it feels heavy. I'm always suspicious of power supplies that come with sort of cheap generic things like this, but this one does feel quite solid, so I'm hoping it's going to be okay. I mean, if it did have issues, it is just a standard 12 volt power brick, so you could fairly easily replace that. But this does feel solid enough. I can't really judge the full quality of it without tearing it apart, but at least in terms of weight, it doesn't feel too bad. Next up, you get the power cable. So obviously this is intended for the European market more, so you get a European cable, although they do include an adapter. Now for me, I'll just replace this cable with one with a UK plug. There's no reason to use this, but this is what the sellers that generally sell from China really should learn, is to include proper safe travel adapters, like this one. Quite often when you import things into the UK from abroad, or you buy a product like this that's from a UK seller but it's designed for the European market, the seller will include one of these sort of plug adapters. If you watch the YouTuber Big Clive, you'll have seen these. If not, I recommend checking out his videos on these. But these are absolute death traps. I mean, he calls them death adapters. The plugs don't fit into them properly, so they're dangerous for that. You can stick screwdrivers in there and shock yourself. The pins are never the right length. they're not fused, so they're not safe to use on a UK power circuit. These things are really dangerous. So it's actually really nice to see the seller include something like this, which is a nice proper safe travel adapter, or not travel adapter, proper safe plug adapter. These are what really all sellers should be including. So it's really nice to see a seller like this include a proper safe adapter like this. So what you do, you take it like that, the plug goes in there, clips in, top goes down, you can screw it on, and it converts the Euro plug to a nice safe UK plug, which is properly compliant, everything's the right length, and it's got a built-in fuse. So yeah, it's a slight diversion there, but it's just really nice to see a seller actually include a safe adapter for the plug, rather than one of these death traps. So now that we've seen the accessories, let's take a look at the receiver. So here it is, let's get it out, see what it comes with. So there it is. It's quite thin, it's quite a nice size. I've seen a lot that were really thick, so this is quite a nice thin one, which will be quite neat to have. Left hand side there, you've got this sort of black plastic where you've got the power button and the screen behind here. And then here's the card flap, so that comes down. And that reveals a front USB 2 port, a sort of PCMCIA slot, that'll be for, it's not PCMCIA though, it's for cards. And then you've also got another smart card reader here. This does feel quite plasticky and fragile, but it's not a big deal, you're not going to use that regularly. On the side there's just screws and air vents and more on the top. And around the back we can take a look at the I/O. On the rear we can see we have the satellite tuners. Both of these have two connections. On the top there's RF in, and the bottom there's RF out. RF in is what you connect to your satellite dish or the feed coming into your building. And then RF out you can use to connect to other boxes. Now, it's not quite as simple as just connecting lots of boxes up daisy-chained and having them all work. With a satellite system, the receiver has to send signals to the LNB or multi-switch to select what polarization and frequency band it wants to receive. Therefore, you can't just connect them all together and have them all work at the same time. If you had another receiver daisy-chained off of this and had this receiver switched on, chances are the other receiver would only be able to pick up channels that are on the same frequency band and polarization as this receiver is currently tuned to. However, hopefully, if this is sanely designed, if this receiver is left in standby, daisy-chained tuners should be able to work and receive the full channel selection. So you can use this to connect multiple receivers together to the same satellite feed, as long as you're only really using one at a time. You'll also notice that these tuners are like little cards. They're not built into the motherboard, they're actually modules you can replace. That's because this system has modular tuners that you can swap out for different ones. Because I want this for satellite, I went for one with two satellite tuners. However, you can actually swap these and have another tuner which does terrestrial TV over an aerial or cable TV. And you can mix and match, so you could have two of those tuners if you wanted to only do cable or terrestrial, or you could have one of each and have a satellite tuner and a terrestrial tuner. With World of Satellite you can pick what tuners you want when you order it, or you can buy them separately later. So I just went for the two satellite tuners because that's what I need. There's also other receivers that are also Linux like this, where you can get up to I think 4 tuners in them now, so you could have 2 satellite tuners and 2 terrestrial tuners, so it's really flexible with what you can put into them. For the rest of the I/O, we have a 3.5mm AV jack, which you could use as a breakout probably to connect to either composite or component video, I'm not sure on that. But that's pretty dated nowadays. You've then got an optical connection to connect to an older AV receiver, and then of course you've got HDMI, which you'll use to connect to basically everything modern, including my AV receiver, so that's all I'll be using to connect this up. Next you've got a USB 2 port and then a USB 3 port. It's good to see USB 3 on this because this is a fairly modern device. I think it only came out a couple of years ago, if that. So it's got a modern chipset that supports USB 3, which is good for connecting external hard drives. You've got Ethernet, which in the case of this receiver is gigabit, which is really good. And then you've got the 12 volt, 3 amp DC input to connect to the power brick. So now before I fire this up, what we'll do is we'll pop the top off and fit the hard drive. So hard drive wise, I'm just using this, which is an old WD Blue 500 gig. If you're buying this all new, you'd probably want to try and find a hard drive designed for DVR use, one of the AV ones. However, I already had this spare, so I may as well throw it in. I was also toying with the idea of putting an SSD in it, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Because when you're using timeshift recording, the thing constantly writes what video you're watching to the disk and then deletes the older stuff, so you've got that buffer so you can rewind live TV. So I'm not sure about having an SSD there because you're constantly going to be writing to it. So for that, a hard drive seems sensible. I'm also not sure if I'll leave the hard drive in it because this thing can write to a network share, so I might end up having this write to my server instead of the internal hard drive. But we'll take it apart anyway and fit the hard drive so we can see inside it. So it's got one screw in the back, 2 on each side, so let's get inside. Okay, so I've removed all 5 screws, so let's take the top off. So, don't know how this comes off. Does it slide? Yeah, it slides back and then just slides all the way back. Okay, cool. Slightly fiddly. How does this come off? Try not to like scratch it, of course, because the whole thing they had about devaluing it and charging restocking fees. Oh, what have I done? There we go. A little bit tricky to get the top off, but now we're in. Now here we can see the overall layout of the inside of the receiver. Over here we have the hard drive mounting, which takes a 2.5-inch drive. It's also shock mounted, which is nice. You're not going to get too much vibration from a 2.5-inch drive, but it still is really nice having that. It'll just make the receiver a lot quieter. Over here you can then see we have the main board, where we have this raised card module here connected with a cable. All the front, well, there's your front USB port connected with a cable there, and this cable goes over to the front display and power button assembly. Under here will be the main chipset, and then interestingly over here there's this raised board that has just an ARM Cortex M3 microcontroller on it. I don't know what that would be for, it's just a standard microcontroller, but it sits next to this cable here that goes off to the front screen. So I wonder if this is some sort of, they're using this as just a sort of interface chip to provide a nice easy interface between the main CPU here and the front screen, and they're just using this as a little driver for it. So I'm guessing that's what that's for, but it's just a little interesting to see it sitting there. Down here you can then see we have 2 ports. This one's labelled HDD for the power to the hard drive. This one here isn't labelled, so I'm not sure if that's just a second power connector for, I don't know, something else, or if it's something different, so I'm going to connect the hard drive to here. And then here we've got the single SATA connector. Around here we can then see the 2 satellite tuners, which are on their own little neat boards here that just go into these pin headers on the main board. So these are fairly easy to replace. There's just a single screw on the back to take out, and the whole receiver, the whole tuner module should just lift straight out, and you can swap in a different one. So while we're in here, it's probably worth talking about the specs of this box. The main chipset in this is a BCM7251S from Broadcom. This is a chipset designed for satellite receivers such as this, and it has an ARM CPU in it. The CPU is 1.7 GHz dual core, so it's pretty powerful, especially very powerful for a set-top box like this. It also has 1 GB of RAM and 4 GB of flash to hold the main firmware. 4 GB is a lot of flash for this, so that's a really good thing to have, because it's a flash that also holds all the plugins you install. When buying a box like this, it's definitely worth checking out what chipset it uses and seeing what firmware is available for it. Not all of the Linux images are available for all the chipsets. Generally, if you buy one with an ARM CPU or a MIPS CPU, you're usually okay, but some of the cheaper boxes use completely random architectures with random chipsets from different manufacturers, and they don't all have that good support for different firmwares, and you might end up having to build it yourself. So it's definitely worth checking out what chipset it has and looking up support for that chipset. But overall, this device is a very up-to-date device with a very modern chipset, which is really good. So what I'll do now is go and mount the hard drive, and then I'll come back with it installed. Okay, so I've now fitted the hard drive, which was completely painless. Just undo the 2 screws that were holding this main bracket down, put the drive in, 4 screws in the bottom, put it back in, put the 2 screws that came out the bracket back in, and then take the other 2 out of the bag and fit them in with the washers. And it's now completely securely mounted there with the shock mounting in place. Then all I needed to do was plug the connector into the back, run the power and data to the motherboard, and then route the cables neatly so they don't snake everywhere. And it was dead easy to do, and the cables are actually really good. They're the perfect length for this, so yeah, it's pretty neat. So all I need to do now, seal the receiver up, plug it in, and boot it up and see what it does. Now let's take a look at the initial setup of the receiver using its factory supplied firmware. As you can see, the box is now booting up, which is actually pretty quick. Now that it's booted, we are in the setup guide. The first thing to do is to pick the video output that we want to use, which in my case is HDMI. Next we need to pick the resolution. I've set this to 1080p for now since I'm capturing this video, but we'll change it to 4K once I'm actually using the box. It then asks me to pick the language, which I've set to English, at which point we're presented with the main setup wizard. The first thing that it does is connect to the network, which is done automatically since I'm using a wired connection. Next we need to set up the tuners. I just use a basic system where I receive 2 feeds from a multi-switch that feeds all the flats in my building. Therefore I'm setting it to single. If you had a more advanced system that let you use multiple satellites, then you need to configure that appropriately here. When we press continue, it then scans to detect what satellites are available over that feed. In my case, it's Astra 28.2 East. We then need to do exactly the same for the second tuner. This part of the setup would obviously be different if you're using a terrestrial or cable tuner as opposed to the satellite tuners I'm using here. The system will then begin to scan for channels, which takes some time to complete. In my case it took around 15 minutes, so we'll speed that process up here. As you can see, the scan is now finished and it's found 967 channels. However, as you can see on the right hand side, many of these are encrypted channels from providers such as Sky and won't actually be watchable. We'll take a look later at how we organise the channels and remove all the ones that we can't actually view. At this point, I somehow managed to press the wrong button which lost the results of the scan and ended up dumping me into the manual tuning menu. After the setup guide finished, I ended up having to go into the main setup menu and run the automatic scan again. And as you can see, we are now successfully watching live TV. Now while that all looks pretty good, if we open up the EPG, you can see that all the channels are somewhat jumbled and we don't get EPG for them all, and then where we do get EPG information, it only shows the basic now and next information rather than a full 7-day EPG. In order to organise the channels, we need to use a couple of Enigma2 plugins. However, unfortunately, when I tried to install them, the box would simply report that there was no plugins found, followed by a weird error saying that the Software Manager plugin was not available. I could have spent more time trying to fix this, but at this point I decided to give up on the factory image and flash my own Enigma2 image instead. There's a large selection of Enigma2 images available for these boxes. They're all based on the same underlying OS, but like conventional Linux distros, each one has different customizations out of the box. Some are really lightweight and are ideal for low-powered boxes. Others come packed with loads of features out of the box and are great if you want a fully featured system. I tried a few different images, namely OpenATV, OpenPli, OpenViX and HDMU. Realistically, I could have used any of these images to accomplish what I needed, however I ultimately settled on OpenViX as I just found it to work the best for what I was doing out of the box. Installing images is dead easy. I just needed to download the image file for my particular box from the images website. This gave me a zip file which needed to be extracted to a FAT32 formatted flash drive. It's then just a simple case of putting the flash drive into the box when it's unplugged, plugging the box in, and quickly holding down the power button on the front of the box until the screen says flashing. After a few minutes, the box then started up into its new firmware, which presented me with a quick start guide, much like what we saw before. Of course, this flashing process will vary between different boxes, but there's usually pretty good documentation online, assuming your box is popular enough. If you can't find documentation or images for your exact box, it's worth digging around online to see if your particular device is sold under a different brand or model, as this is often the case, and there's often images available for models that are very similar or the same as yours, just sold under a different name. Here we are now booted up into OpenViX, and we're watching live TV, so let's take a look at it. Here's the main TV viewing screen, where we can view information about what channel we're watching, as well as more advanced information about the stream. I've also enabled time shift, which means I can easily rewind what I'm watching, as well as pause and fast forward it. One thing that's worth mentioning is how responsive this is. When fast forwarding and rewinding, the motion's pretty smooth, and there's very little delay between pressing play and the playback starting again. This is great, as I've used other set-top boxes, including some Sky boxes, which can have a really annoying delay when trying to resume playback after fast forwarding, which results in you missing half the program because you've pressed play and it's fast forwarded halfway through your program before it actually starts playing again. So this responsiveness of this box is absolutely brilliant. It's also worth pointing out that what you're seeing here is the included skin called Magic FHD. There's a large number of different skins available, so you can really personalise everything to your preference. If we press the EPG button, you'll see that it brings up a list of what are known as bouquets. A bouquet is a group of channels organised in a specific way, including the numbering. OpenViX includes a plugin called Auto Bouquets, which can be used to create and manage these bouquets using information that's transmitted by the satellite. I've used this to download bouquet data from the satellite for both FreeSat and Sky TV. This means that the channels are now organised in a sane manner into different categories, which makes browsing them so much easier. I've also used this to hide all the paid channels so it only shows free-to-air channels, so I don't have that list of channels that I can't actually get sitting there teasing me. I've also set it so that the channel numbering matches Sky's, which makes it dead easy to switch between channels. Also, just for the avoidance of doubt, while the channel categories and numbering here matches that of Sky, I'm only using this to receive the free-to-air channels. I'm not doing any sort of dodgy decryption to attempt to receive the paid Sky channels. If I wanted to watch those, I'd be completely happy to pay for a Sky subscription. If we go into one of these bouquets, we can see the full list of channels, including a full 7-day EPG, which is retrieved from the satellite with the help of another included plugin called Cross EPG. This runs on a nightly schedule where it downloads all the EPG data from the satellite and imports it into the system. The EPG data is also regularly written to the internal hard drive, so that it's available if the box is ever rebooted. We can also cycle through the different bouquets using the remote. You can see the name changing in the top left of the screen. Notice that when we're not in the All Channels bouquet, the channel numbers go a bit strange, but the correct numbers always work if you type them in. This interface also lets you set recordings on a one-off basis or by creating an auto timer where you can set criteria which, when matched, will result in a timer being created automatically. This is a bit like a poor man's version of the Sky Series Link feature. Recordings then can be easily accessed and played back, as well as being organised into folders if you so desire. I'm also pleased to confirm that this box is actually capable of playing back full 4K satellite streams, as you can see here with this demo channel. Of course I'm only capturing this at 1080p, but it does show as full 4K when I'm playing it on my TV, and the quality is incredible. What's also really impressive is that the time shift features work flawlessly, even with 4K content, which is surely a fairly big stress on the box's CPU, as it's having to both simultaneously record and play back the 4K video. If you want to expand the box even further, you can easily install plugins by going into the setup menu and browsing the wide selection of plugins, which can be installed in just a couple of button presses. You can also install plugins by transferring them from a PC over FTP or by SSHing into the box if you prefer. One thing that's worth pointing out is that by default these boxes run FTP, SSH and Telnet servers without a password set, which means that anyone on your local network would be able to log into the box. You can however set a password in the settings menu, which is definitely worth doing. One plugin which is absolutely excellent is OpenWebAF, which allows you to not only control the box from a simple web interface, it also allows you to stream both live TV and recordings to other devices on your network. This pretty much works out of the box. The only setting I had to change was the one that allows you to access it over a VPN. This is somewhat confusingly named, but essentially it means that you're allowed to access the box from a subnet other than the one the box is on. This is required for me as my box is on a different subnet from my PCs. In its most basic form, OpenWebAF provides this web interface which allows you to manage the box over the network. From here you can turn the box on and off, or control it using the virtual remote control. You can also browse the channels and change what channel the box is currently showing, or you can even view the EPG. This is all pretty useful, however you can go much further and use this to stream live TV over the network. The UI provides these links to the URL of a stream which you can open in media player software such as VLC, which will begin to play the stream. The quality of the stream is actually really good. The stream you're viewing right now is full HD. The only issue is that it struggles to stream 4K reliably, although this isn't really that much of an issue because the only 4K TV I own is connected to the box directly over an HDMI cable. Also, while I'm just using this box over my local network, if you were to set up some sort of way to access the box remotely, such as a VPN or using an SSH tunnel, you'll be able to access these streams over the internet, assuming your connection has high enough upload speed. Even better than this is the fact that the web interface has a comprehensive API, which allows plugins to be developed for software such as Kodi. To test this, I picked up a cheap second-hand Amazon Fire TV stick to allow me to watch satellite TV in my office. I sideloaded Kodi onto it and configured the Enigma2 plugin, which was a simple case of supplying the IP of my satellite receiver, authentication details, as well as supplying the name of the bouquet that I wanted to download EPG data for. We can now browse the EPG and view TV streamed directly from the box. The stream takes a while to get going smoothly, it sort of stutters a little bit at the start, but once it's running it actually works pretty well. If I was doing this again, I'd maybe get something a bit more powerful than the Fire TV stick because it can be a little bit sluggish at times, but the Kodi plugin actually works really well. You can go even further than this and even play back recordings directly from the box. The only real issue I found with the Kodi plugin is that you can't really pause the live TV stream. It works fine if you're playing back a recording, but you can't pause or rewind live TV or do the time shift functionality. It also doesn't really work if you try and play back a recording that's currently being recorded to, so you can't have a recording that's halfway through and start watching it back like you can do on the main box. Kodi seems to think that the recording finished at the end point of the video when you started playback, and won't try and pull in more video that's been recorded to the file since you started. So that's a little bit annoying, but I can't imagine it'd be that hard to fix. So there you go, that was a look at the Mutant HD51 Linux-based satellite receiver. And overall it's an absolutely brilliant bit of kit. It just performs really well. It was fairly easy to set up, it wasn't too bad, but the performance of it is just excellent. It's so fast. So just like going around the menus, loading up channels and stuff, it's just really responsive. The LCD screen on the front of the receiver is actually really good as well. It's a proper dot matrix screen rather than the vacuum fluorescent you see on lots of other receivers, so it displays really clear, easy to read text, which is really nice to have. The features that you get with something like this are excellent. Being able to record to network shares, stream video around the house, all that sort of stuff is just really useful to have in a box like this. So overall I'm very happy with it. So yeah, thank you very much for watching.